The Democrat National Convention is happening this week in Chicago, and Planned Parenthood is there offering free abortions. We are also responding to the Evangelicals for Harris Zoom call, spouting some of the worst and most dangerous theology that I have ever heard. Before we get into all of that, I just want to remind y'all that we've got Share the Arrows coming up. I am so excited for this. We've got Rosaria Butterfield, Elisa Childers, we've got Abby Halberstadt, and guess what? We've got another speaker that I am so excited to announce, but I can't announce it yet. I'm going to announce it soon, though. It's going to be huge. I'm so excited. If you are a Christian woman, come to our conference in Dallas, Texas. Come by yourself. Come with your family. It's going to be absolutely amazing, so equipping and encouraging. ShareTheArrows.com. You can find all of the information there. Francesca Battistelli is going to be leading worship. Oh my goodness, there are thousands and thousands of you already signed up. I hope that there are thousands and thousands of more just because I want to see your faces and be encouraged with you in this very crazy and turbulent time. So go to sharethearrows.com. All right, this episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use code Allie at checkout. That's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Hey guys, welcome to Relatable. Happy Monday. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. There might be some of you who have never tuned into the podcast before. This is your first time, and you might have found me through an article in The Atlantic that was published on Friday morning. It was a profile on yours truly, and I've got some things to say about it. I don't have time to get to it today. We've got too much to get into. Today is a Monday, which means we are focusing on politics, and so I will have some more time tomorrow. I will respond to some things good and maybe what I consider a misrepresentation in the article tomorrow, and also why I think it should be really encouraging for all of you who have been tuning in to Relatable for a long time, and what it means that God can do through our voices in the culture. And so we'll talk about that, as well as it ends with us tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll focus a little bit more on culture and a couple other things going on. But today it is a Monday. We've got to focus on what is going on in the election. Also, I know it doesn't look and sound as professional as my typical podcast episodes do. That is because I am remote right now. And so today's episode, tomorrow's episode will look and sound like this. Thank y'all for being patient and for bearing with us. All right. So today is the start of the Democratic National Convention. Democrats are gathering in Chicago, Illinois this week for the 2024 Democratic National Convention. Begins today. It runs through Thursday. Governor Tim Walz will deliver the vice presidential acceptance speech on Wednesday, with Harris delivering her presidential acceptance speech on Thursday. That is assuming that they are going to be the nominees, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that at this point. So far, they've been the presumptive nominees. So that means that when she announced that she was running, Biden said he's stepping out of the race. Then she picked her vice presidential candidate. That meant that they were candidates for the nomination. A lot of people asked me, wait, no one voted for this. How are they already the nominees, according to the press and according to a lot of Democrats? That's because she doesn't really have any challengers. She has been the presumptive nominee, but she hasn't been so far the official nominee. After this week, she will be the official nominee. I don't think that there is going to be an upset there. I do think that her and Walz will be officially on the ticket after this week. President Biden is also set to speak tonight, along with Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. Brandon Johnson is quite the left-wing radical. Other confirmed speakers include Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, former President Barack Obama, former President Bill Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's so interesting that Bill Clinton gets as much grace as he does, considering his own background and all of the criticism that is lodged at Donald Trump about his history with women and some of the accusations that have been made against him can be made equally against Bill Clinton, and yet he is still hoisted up as a hero. Because at the end of the day, all of this identity politics stuff, all of this politics of character and integrity and normalcy, that kind of rhetoric that you hear a lot from the Democrats, it's a facade. It's vapid. It's not substantive. They don't actually mean it. At the end of the day, they are going to fight for and applaud their political allies. It really just comes down to what policies you represent and the kind of vibes that you give off. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries. The convention's overall theme is for the people, for our future. So tonight will be for the people. As I said, President Biden will be speaking. Tuesday, a bold vision for America's future. Wednesday, a fight for our freedoms. This is one to look out for. If you tune into any of this, I would tune in on Wednesday. I guarantee, as we will talk about more today, every single night is going to have something to do with abortion, but especially on Wednesday, it's called a fight for our freedoms. That is the theme of the night. Walz will address the convention focusing on retaining the rights that Democrats say have been stripped away under Republican administrations, including reproductive rights and others. And just to pause there, because we've talked about this before, but Walz and Harris are running on freedom. They understand that most Democrat policies, the most radical Democrat policies that both Walz and Harris, according to their records, represent, are not really popular with the American people. And so they have to use these kinds of euphemisms like bodily autonomy or reproductive rights, and even complete misnomers when it comes to the policies they represent, like freedom. We know that they don't actually care about our constitutional freedoms, our actual fundamental freedoms. When they talk about freedom, what they are talking about is sexual libertinism and the right to kill your baby. So on this night, on Wednesday, when Tim Walz says we got to fight for our freedoms and the freedoms that are being taken away from us by Republicans, what they mean is sexual libertinism and abortion. Those are the only two freedoms that they're talking about. He's not talking about freedom of speech. He's not talking about freedom of religion. He's not talking about freedom of protest. They're talking about the freedom to mutilate a person, and especially a child's body, who says that they are confused about their gender. They're talking about the freedom to talk about gender transition and sexual confusion in the classroom. They're talking about the freedom to have your baby poisoned or dismembered. These are the only freedoms they're talking about. So when they say that they are the ticket for freedom, or the ticket that represents freedom, they're talking about freedom to do those two things. When we look at the record, as we have talked about already, of Harris and Walz, we know that they will not fight, that they do not fight, that they have not fought for our constitutional freedoms. When we look at Kamala Harris and her record as Attorney General of California, I've actually got an article up today in the Christian Post about this and about her record of just trampling on constitutional freedoms in service of the abortion lobby. When she was Attorney General of California, she pushed the FACT Act, which would have forced pregnancy centers to advertise for abortion. These are pro-life pregnancy centers offering women real life-affirming options. The FACT Act would have forced them to promote abortion. Of course, that was overturned by the Supreme Court because it is an obvious violation of the First Amendment. Also, when she was Attorney General of California, she went after David Daleiden. David Daleiden was the pro-life journalist who uncovered through undercover journalism some Planned Parenthood employees saying that they were interested in a pay-for-play scheme where they would get paid for offering the body parts of unborn children. Instead of investigating Planned Parenthood, Kamala Harris sicked state authorities on David Daleiden so that they invaded his apartment and seized the evidence that he had. And so she doesn't care about our constitutional rights. She doesn't care about our First Amendment rights. She cares about abortion. She cares about the LGBTQ lobby. When Tim Walz was governor of Minnesota, he said that churches have to cap their attendance at just 10 people. Meanwhile, abortion facilities were able to continue to operate at full scale. And again, this was challenged in the courts, and the challengers, the churches and the religious organizations, won. Because again, this is a clear violation of the First Amendment. And so just remember that when they're talking about freedom, those are the things that they're talking about. They're talking about abortion. They're talking about sexual libertinism. They're not talking about the fundamental rights that have to exist for our republic to survive and thrive. They're not talking about the right that a child has to not be murdered. They're not talking about your right to worship and to protest as you see fit. Remember that the Biden DOJ has put peaceful pro-life protesters and grandmothers who are peaceful pro-life protesters in prison for years. We're talking about men and women in their 70s and their late 70s who are now going to be in prison, maybe for the rest of their lives, because they peacefully blocked an entrance to a murder mill, aka an abortion clinic. And so just remember that this is not the party of freedom. This is not the platform of freedom. This is not the ticket of freedom. This is the ticket of abortion through all 9 months for any reason, paid for by the taxpayer. This is the ticket that will trample on your First Amendment rights if you disagree with the radical claims and agenda of the LGBTQ lobby. So just a note there. I want to get into just a little bit the significance of Chicago and the significance of this particular DNC and the historical parallels that I think we see at least somewhat, and then what it tells us about what we can expect this time. All right, quick pause to tell you about our first sponsor. It's We Heart Nutrition. This is the company that I get all of my supplements from. They are a Christian pro-life company. They are completely unashamed about their values. They put it at the forefront. This is also a family-owned company. They're relatable viewers, and I just love them so much, and I really love their products. They're so high quality. All of their ingredients come in the most bioavailable form, so they really do work. Like, your body absorbs them really well. I take their postnatal supplement, their omega-3s. I take their iron supplement. I've always been a little anemic, and this has been a game changer for me. I also always take the magnesium before bed to promote restfulness, and I just love their vitamins. I really think that they keep me healthy, my hair, my nails, my skin really healthy. You can take a 20-second quiz so that they can personalize your vitamin regimen for you. Go to weheartnutrition.com, use code Allie for 20% off. weheartnutrition.com, code Allie. What's interesting about Democrats choosing Chicago, there's a couple reasons why this is interesting. One, all conventions, both for Republicans and Democrats, since at least 2008 have been in a swing state. So, for example, in 2020, the RNC was in Charlotte, North Carolina. North Carolina has become increasingly purple. The DNC was held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2020. It was mostly virtual. That's also where the RNC was this year, a few weeks ago. Illinois at this point is not a swing state. Chicago is also an interesting choice because of the proximity to Milwaukee. It's not really usual for conventions of each party to be that close to each other geographically in the same year. But Chicago has hosted more party conventions than any other city. Last hosted the RNC in 1960, so it's been a long time. And then they last hosted the DNC in 1996 when Clinton and Gore were renominated by the Democrats. Chicago also hosted the DNC in 1968. And as you heard Glenn Beck talk about on my show a couple weeks ago, there are many parallels between 1968 and today. It's not an exact comparison, but there are certainly some similarities. So LBJ was the incumbent at the time. He just announced that he would not be seeking re-election. I think it was like a week before the DNC. So this just added to the chaos that was already going on in the background in America. There were massive protests surrounding the DNC that had to do with the U.S.'s involvement in Vietnam. The assassination of RFK had just happened in June. He was a primary candidate, and he had just been murdered a couple months before, and the assassination of MLK Jr. in April of that year. So there was a lot of civil unrest. There was a lot of racial tension going on, a lot of chaos. I think people probably thought then this was like end of empire kind of stuff going on. I'm sure that there were a lot of Baptists out there. I say this as a Baptist who were like, okay, we've got the prophecies being fulfilled right now. It is almost the end of time. It's reported that this year there will be 100,000 or more anti-Israel protesters and rioters in Chicago this week outside the DNC. Businesses are boarding up their windows in anticipation of this violence. And then you've got the Chicago mayor, as I said, Brandon Johnson. He's a left-wing radical. You've got Illinois governor. They're both Democrats saying that, oh, these are mostly peaceful protesters, but you've seen the footage. We've talked about it. We know these people are burning American flags. They're desecrating American monuments like the Liberty Bell. They're burning the Israeli flag. These are absolutely not peaceful people. The reason why they're mostly protesting outside the DNC rather than, say, outside the RNC, even though many of them are going to vote for Kamala Harris, is because they know that the DNC is actually susceptible to succumbing to that kind of pressure. They know that the DNC is more likely to be pro-Hamas than Republicans are. And so that's why they're using whatever power and influence they have to get Kamala Harris on their side, which I think it's very likely that she will be. So lots of chaos in 1968, lots of chaos today. Now, Glenn Beck on the show, he said that there is not only going to be chaos outside of the DNC, but also on the convention floor. Remember, delegates are voting for the nominee. That's where this process is happening. And we didn't have all of the information then when Glenn was on the show as we do now. And with the information that we had then, he predicted that it wouldn't be Kamala because Obama hadn't endorsed her yet. It was hard to understand at that point, still is in some ways, how someone with such low favorability like Kamala Harris could gain enough to actually be the nominee, could gain enough support to get the excitement that would be necessary for the Democratic Party to get behind her. According to 538, at the end of June, she had a 36% favorability rating. And that is very similar, by the way, to what Mike Pence had about this time. And that was 2020. Like imagine, I mean, think about everything that was happening in 2020. So he had about a 36%, I think even a little bit more favorability rating at the time. And Kamala Harris, this person that we're supposed to believe is so popular, she, before the assassination attempt, before she announced her candidacy, had a 36% favorability rating. Now she is at 44%. And this surge, I know that still sounds low, but that's a big upswing in a short amount of time. This surge is strictly because of media framing, the media pushing her as something that she has never been seen as, which is this commanding, persuasive, likable leader. You remember when she ran for president in 2020, she got absolutely nowhere. She was too radical. She didn't have any stage presence. She came across as deeply unlikable. But now we're supposed to believe that she is this dynamic, commanding presence, that she knows what she's talking about, that she knows what she's doing. You'll see over and over again, the media keeps saying that Trump and Vance are stoking fear through their campaign, and Kamala and Walz are waging a campaign of joy. That's what they keep saying, joy, 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 over and over again. Of course, I think their policy proposals, who they are, and even their rhetoric completely belies that media framing. But if they say it enough, they know enough people will believe them. There's a reason why her handlers, her advisors don't let her do interviews. She has not been talking to the press. She's barely had any extemporaneous interactions with them. She rarely speaks spontaneously at all, even from the stage. When she does, it's very hard to listen to. And look, maybe that's a good strategy. I can't say that I'm necessarily faulting them for that. They want to win. They know that if they unleash Kamala, that they cannot win. And so they're being very careful and very guarded about what they let her do and what they let her say. Now, if we had a press that was actually interested and even feigning objectivity, she would not have the energy surrounding her as she does right now, because as the media well knows, as the Democratic Party well knows, her policy proposals, which in her words, this is not hyperbole, they are unlimited abortion, paid for by the taxpayers, we'll get into in a second, price caps, an end to fracking, banning private health insurance. They're not popular. Most Americans don't want those things. That's why she chose Tim Walz. That's why she's running on freedom, because these are just kind of signals to middle America and the moderate independent that, hey, I'm not going to be that radical. I know that people have called me Kamala the Communist. I know that my record is absolutely extreme and that I have been rated the furthest left senator when I was in the Senate. But no, that's not me. That's the old me. That's not me anymore. I'm going to bring this country together. I'm going to be completely middle of the road. It's the same thing Joe Biden did. And hey, again, it might be an effective strategy, but you as a thinking person need to understand that it is not true. It is a false representation of who she is, who she has been, and who she will be as president. Okay, for those of you who have teenagers and you're wondering, what the heck am I going to do for college? I don't want to send my kid to this communist indoctrination factory and for them to learn all of these values that are opposed to the values that we have spent 18 years instilling in them. You need to check out Hillsdale. Hillsdale College is an amazing university that really has Christian values. And also, they're offering more than 40 free online courses right now in the most important and enduring subject, of course, that is theology. You can learn about the works of C.S. Lewis, the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution, even the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. That's probably pertinent right now. All kinds of things. All of this stuff is available totally for free through Hillsdale College. So if you want to learn more about them, see what they're all about, go ahead, enroll for one of these courses. Go to hillsdale.edu/relatable to enroll. hillsdale.edu/relatable. Now, in 1968, the Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Senator Edmund Muskie were nominated, but they lost to Richard Nixon in the general election. Nixon was elected by what he called in 1969. He didn't come up with this phrase, but he popularized it. He won by the silent majority, those who weren't going along with the progressive revolution, but also weren't vocal voices in public discourse, weren't represented by the media. I certainly think that we still have a level of that in the United States, definitely. There are people who are going to vote for Trump and hold their nose. There's people who just don't like to talk about politics but are going to vote for Trump. There are people who just aren't represented by the media who maybe are talking about it, but they just don't have big platforms and large voices. I think that there are probably celebrities and athletes and very influential people who are really conservative and are going to vote for Donald Trump and who just aren't going to talk about it. So I think that that exists. Do I think that we should hang our hat on that? Do I think we should put our hope there? No. Because what you want is to have a candidate that doesn't make people feel like they need to be silent. Now, maybe you could say it's not Trump's fault. Maybe it's the media's fault, academia's fault, all of these cultural megaphones out there who are making you feel like you're a bigot if you don't want to vote for radical leftists like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. But we still don't want, we don't want it to be made so hard for a conservative to say, yes, I am enthusiastically voting for this person. So if you're in that bucket and you're like, look, I just wish that I could have a candidate that I'm excited about, I do have a message for you at the end of this. But basically, without burying the lead, what we have to focus on is not the person, because we have two very flawed people. They could go tit for tat on their moral issues, but we have to focus on the policies. Enthusiastically vote for one set of policies and against another set of policies. What you'll notice, speaking of policies, that if you look at the 1968 Democratic Party platform, is that there's no mention of abortion. Of course, this was before Roe v. Wade, and before a lot of abortion politics, but abortion was heavily restricted pre-Roe, especially before the 1960s. Leftists like to act like conservatives all of a sudden, evangelicals all of a sudden made this political issue out of thin air just to grab for power. But that's not true. I mean, this became a big issue after Roe v. Wade changed the landscape, and after the sexual revolution really changed how people thought about reproduction and abortion and what counts as a quote-unquote woman's right. Before the 60s and 70s, it was broadly accepted that killing an unborn child should be illegal. I'm not saying there was 100% consensus on that, but that was the prevailing opinion, the prevailing perspective at the time. So again, it wasn't the right that changed. It was the left that changed, and the right responded to that change. But the platform that they will be voting on this year at the Democrat National Convention, it's available online, and the quote-unquote right to abortion is a central part of that. So if you look at the segment on quote-unquote reproductive health, and the reason I say it like that is because reproductive health, when you're talking about abortion, is a euphemism. If you're having an abortion, then reproduction has already happened. No one's stopping you from reproducing. No one's forcing you to reproduce. No one is telling you that you should have unprotected sex, that you have to have unprotected sex. Like, no one is controlling your actual reproduction. So abortion doesn't count in reproductive health. Reproduction has already happened. You have a unique life with unique DNA, and it is a human being scientifically. And if it is a human being, then there is no moral, no philosophical reason why that human being should not have a right not to be murdered in the same way that you and I have a right not to be murdered. That is a fundamental right. And so you'll see in this DNC platform, they say this is a fundamental right. The right to kill your child, the right to abortion is a fundamental right. No, it's not. It's actually not a constitutional right. It's nowhere in the Constitution. What is a fundamental right is the right to life, because without the right to life, none of the other rights even matter or exist. That's why in the Declaration of Independence, we read that we are guaranteed the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That ordering is not arbitrary. You can't have all of this liberty and freedom that Walls and Harris say that they stand for without the right to life. It precedes all of that. It precedes all of that logically and in importance, and of course, morally and biblically as well. That life inside the womb is no less a human being because it is small, because it is less developed, because it is less sentient. If you apply all of those standards to people inside the womb as justifications for their murder, then why don't you apply those standards to people outside of the womb? Do you think we should be able to murder someone because they have a hard life, because they're poor, because they're abused, because they're unwanted, because they're small, because they're less smart, because they can't fight for themselves? You wouldn't use those as justifications to kill a 5-year-old, right? Even though they're smaller, less powerful, and less knowledgeable than a 16-year-old? Of course not. That's how ridiculous it is, morally, logically, to say that a child inside the womb, because of its location or size or stage of development, deserves to be murdered, to be torn apart with forceps, to be poisoned with medication. It is a barbaric position that is a central piece of Kamala Harris's campaign. It's also a central piece to the Democratic Party in general. So the platform says this. It says, Trump Supreme Court appointees overturned Roe v. Wade, eliminating a fundamental constitutional right. That's not what it did. It said this is a state issue, which I disagree that it's a state's issue, but that's what it decided. And denying women across the nation the right to choose. The extreme act of overturning Roe, it wasn't extreme. Of course, they're not making constitutional arguments here, because they are activists. They don't care about the Constitution, which had been the law of the land for nearly half a century. That's also not true. Has already had devastating consequences nationwide. Really, according to CNN, over 30,000 babies have not been aborted because of the overturning of Roe and the consequential restrictions on abortion that have been able to be passed by states. And they see that as dangerous. They see that as devastating. They also talk about IVF, which we've talked about many times on this show. We don't have time to get into all of that. But This platform says Trump has refused to commit to vetoing the Life at Conception Act. It is Life at Conception, by the way, a national abortion ban that threatens IVF access nationwide. And his allies are openly attacking IVF. Now, they are admitting something that a lot of people won't admit, that if you have an act that says life starts at conception and therefore that life is entitled to the same rights, the same right to life that you and I are, that threatens IVF, because in vitro fertilization plays fast and loose with human ethics, because there's eugenics involved in the process and there's the destruction of embryos involved in the process. Yeah, I do think that all life should be protected. And I understand that not everyone who goes through IVF uses those eugenics methods, which are very common, or discards their embryos, which is also very common. I mean, there's over 1 million embryos left on ice. And yes, if these are people made in the image of God, which is the Christian belief, then we have to care what happens to them. I mean, maybe there is some kind of compromise that we can come to where we say, okay, you can't just discard embryos. You can't use this eugenics process. However many eggs or eggs you fertilize, however many embryos you create, you have to transfer. And can that be a compromise at least to say that we can all agree that life shouldn't be destroyed? But Democrats, of course, don't believe that. They say we will pass national legislation to make Roe the law of the land again. And what that practically means is, because basically Roe v. Wade says in general, I mean, there's some nuances to this, but it is a right and cannot be infringed upon to restrict abortion before viability, which has changed as technology has changed and developed, but that's typically about 24 weeks. I mean, that's close to the 3rd trimester. That is extremely late in a pregnancy. And so what this would mean, if they take this to the federal level, would mean that no state can restrict abortion before 24 weeks. And that is going to be federalized. That is going to be a law that they pass if they get a majority in the House and the Senate. They also say, we will repeal the Hyde Amendment. Okay, well, the Hyde Amendment, Biden used to favor the Hyde Amendment. It was a compromise, a bipartisan compromise that said, okay, if we're going to allow abortion, we are not going to allow federal tax dollars to fund abortion. Well, this Democratic platform is saying that they're going to get rid of that they are going to force your federal tax dollars to pay for the slaughtering of unborn children, whether you like it or not. Ooh, so much for that freedom that they said that they were running on. And then they made this, of course, back when President Biden was the candidate. And in his second term, or the nominee, and in his second term, President Biden will continue to support access to FDA-approved medication abortion, appoint leaders at the FDA who respect science, and appoint judges who uphold fundamental freedoms. Again, that fundamental freedom language excludes the fundamental right of a child to not be brutally murdered. Remember, abortion is brutal murder. It is poisoning. It is starvation. It is vacuuming a human being outside of the only home she has ever known. It is using forceps to dismember a child, to crush the skull of a child. Abortion, people tell me, that's not true. That's a lie. That's not really what happens. What do you think happens in an abortion? What do you think? It's fairy dust? What do you think goes on in an abortion? Of course it's brutal. It's killing a child. If you haven't seen Unplanned, I really recommend that you do. It is the story of Abby Johnson, who used to be a Planned Parenthood employee, a star employee at Planned Parenthood, and left. And now she helps other abortion workers leave. But it shows a simulation of what it looks like on a sonogram when a baby is aborted. I mean, as a pro-life person, I saw this a few years ago. I was also pregnant at the time, so that didn't help. But it wrecked me. And, go back and listen to that episode with Seth Gruber. If you haven't watched it already, then you should. He talks about the importance of actually showing what an abortion is and showing the bodies of those affected by it. I know it makes us cringe and it makes us uncomfortable, but, he compares that to Emmett Till and what that did to raise awareness of just the brutality of prejudice at the time. And I actually think it's important. I do think it's important because there's a reason you professing pro-choicers out there don't want to hear what happens in an abortion. There's a reason why you say you don't know what happens in an abortion. There's a reason why you deny what happens in an abortion. There's a reason why you don't want to look at those pictures. There's a reason why you don't want to think about it. There's a reason why you use euphemisms like pregnancy tissue and terminating a pregnancy and reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. Look, if you're on the winning side, you don't have to do that. That's a really good indication of who is right and who is wrong, who's lying, who has to use code words, who has to use euphemisms, who has to use misleading information and misleading rhetoric to get you on their side, and who is willing to tell you the cold, hard truth. The person willing to tell you the cold, hard truth, they know that they're on the right side. All I have to do, all I have really ever done to convince people to be pro-life, and by the grace of God, I get messages almost every day, definitely every week, from people saying, I used to be pro-choice, but I listened to this and now I'm pro-life. Again, praising God for that. I don't even take credit for it. All I've had to do, it's a really easy job, is just tell you the truth. This is what happens in an abortion. No hyperbole, no funny business, no manipulation. Here's what happens in an abortion. That changes people's mind. So if you are on the other side of it, where you have to obscure what happens in an abortion, you're on the wrong side. You're on the wrong side. Okay? End of story. And you do not have to vote for the party that wants that, who wants that unfettered. Unfortunately, I don't believe that Republicans are as pro-life as I want them to be. But if I'm looking at the comparison between the side that I know is not going to federalize the lack of restrictions in Roe v. Wade, and the side that wants to make my tax dollars pay for the brutal dismemberment of babies, I mean, yeah, that's an easy choice. That's an easy choice. I mean, this side at the DNC is actually offering free abortions and free vasectomies at the DNC. This is crazy. All right, if you haven't gotten your medical supplies kit from Jace Medical, now is the time to do it. Go ahead and get your Jace case. It'll be filled with all different kinds of antibiotics that you might need in case of an emergency. If you can't get it from the pharmacy for some reason, you can also add in things like ivermectin or an EpiPen or even Tamiflu. We're about to get into flu season, and so you'll have that emergency stash. You can also get a Jace Daily, which is a year-long supply of the prescriptions that you and your family rely on. They're also doing an amazing giveaway right now. When you go to jace.com/Allie, you can win a Jace case for life. So every year you'll get that case of common antibiotics for the most common infections, and you'll always have it just in case you need it. Go to jace.com/Allie. When you buy, enter code Allie at checkout. Jace.com/Allie, code Allie. So let's get into this. Planned Parenthood of Great Rivers of St. Louis announced on X that they are going to be offering free medication abortions. And free vasectomies, and then free Plan B as well. According to Dr. Colleen McNicholas, Chief Medical Officer of Planned Parenthood Great Rivers, there are going to be people traveling to Chicago from all over the country, and I think we should be doing what we can as healthcare providers to show what the impact of good policy and bad policy is. What other kind of healthcare, there's another euphemism, what other kind of healthcare purposely kills a child? Purposely kills a person? It's not healthcare. And I actually met this person, Dr. Colleen McNicholas. I was, in 2019, the sole witness for the Republican side in a hearing in Congress about Trump's pro-life efforts. And of course, the Democrats, they had, I think, 4 witnesses. I was the lone Republican witness, and all of them were pro-abortion, and they were advocating against these pro-life measures that the Trump administration had been advocating for and talking about how horrible they were. And I remember being so scared and so intimidated before I went out there, thinking like, oh my gosh, like this person, Dr. McNicholas, like, yeah, she's pro-abortion, but she's a doctor. Of course, she's going to know what she's talking about. All these people are in the like abortion advocacy activism world. They're going to know so much more than me. And then when I went up there and I listened to them talk, and I listened to the Democrats talk, the Democrat Congress people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all those other people, I realized, oh my gosh, like their arguments are actually as dumb as the arguments that I see from trolls on Twitter and Facebook. They actually don't have any more sophisticated or morally sound arguments than like your random Twitter troll. Wow. And I felt extremely confident after that. I wasn't intimidated or scared at all because, again, I'm like, okay, well, all I have to do is talk about the truth here. And I'm still very thankful for that opportunity. But I just remember Dr. McNicholas, she was questioned by Representative Thomas Massey, and they were going back and forth. And he was so good. He was so good. He kept on pressing her, like, how late is too late? Like, what is the latest week of pregnancy that you have performed an abortion? And she wouldn't say it. And she would never say that she believed in a restriction. And he kept on trying to press her. 40 weeks? Like, is that late? Or is that too late for you? And she kept on saying, it's a mom's choice. It's a mom's choice. It's a mom's choice. And so she has killed an untold number of little babies with their own fingerprints, with arms and legs and a brain, and who had the natural instinct to survive and a natural love and connection to their mother, and she has snuffed their lives out. So this is the person that is performing free abortions, medication abortions at the Democrat National Convention. So they're offering these abortion pills there. Mifepristone is one of the abortion pills that there are protesters. They're like wearing these, and we'll put up a picture. They're wearing these outfits of like that are supposed to be an abortion pill, and on the front of it says like Mife, short for mifepristone, which is extremely disturbing. And they're already protesting out there saying, F the courts, F the state, you can't make us procreate. We'll bleep that part out. But just so you get a picture of this, it's SOT 11. Okay, again, no one is making you procreate. No one's making you procreate. No one is. We're just saying after you've done the procreation, if you cannot kill your child, and unless a woman was raped, like you made the choice. You made the choice to have sex. Consent to sex is consent to pregnancy. It is. And I don't like how we act like that is too much to ask for people to make that kind of responsible choice. Also, there is a giant inflatable IUD, intrauterine device, that is going to be there. You can see that picture if you're watching on YouTube. It's an 18-foot tall inflatable IUD, which is weird. It's just weird. Most Republicans, and certainly not Donald Trump, they're not against birth control. And they're certainly not they're not for banning any kind of birth control. Now, I personally am against hormonal birth control, a fact that is weaponized against me a lot. One, it's bad for your body. It's just bad for your body. It's bad for your hormones. It's bad not to have a period every month. I think there are a lot of issues with it. I think it causes a lot of mental illness, actually, in a lot of cases, but a lot of distress, depression, anxiety, which women don't need more of. But then also, yes, there is an abortifacient aspect to hormonal birth control. And rather than stopping ovulation some months, there is always the possibility that you did ovulate and that you did fertilize an egg, and that egg actually dies because the IUD, or the hormonal birth control, is actually making your womb inhospitable. So that fertilized egg, which has its own DNA, cannot implant into the womb. That is abortifacient. So yes, I personally am against hormonal birth control. Is that part of the Republican platform? At all. No, it's not even a part of Project 2025, which apparently is like the scariest thing ever. A conservative think tank thought of some conservative stuff and put it down in a document, and the left is freaking out about that. It doesn't even have anything to do with Trump. But even scary Project 2025 isn't saying to ban IUDs or any birth control. That is like my personal stance, of course, because I want to be logically consistent about life from conception. Angela Stanton King made a really interesting point about this. I believe that she is the niece of MLK Jr., if I if I remember correctly, but she's been a conservative commentator for a while. And this really matters. Like, if you remember the episode that I just did with Seth Gruber, just about the very Nazi-like history of Planned Parenthood. So she noted this, and we fact-checked these statistics. They are true. She says, in Chicago, where Black residents make up about 29% of the population, Black women disproportionately account for over 40% of abortions in Cook County. This raises important questions about why Planned Parenthood and the DNC might specifically target this community offering abortions. And it's true, Black women, while they only make up about 8% of the national population, they make up, I think it's like 40% of abortions nationally, wildly disproportionate. And of course, Planned Parenthood, they plant themselves in these poor minority, majority communities, and they lie to women about the life inside their womb, and they encourage abortion. And there should be some questions asked about that from the party who says that they stand against systemic racism. That's the one disparity that they don't care about, strangely enough. All other disparities, the left says, are evidence in and of themselves of discrimination and racism. If there is any disparity between white and Black income, white and Black graduation rates, white and Black arrest rates, incarceration rates, it's not because of choices, it's not because of culture, it's not because of anything else. It is because of white supremacy. Of course, they exclude from that conversation that there is also a disparity between Asian Americans and white Americans, with Asian Americans coming out on top for basically every single data point, and no one's saying that that's because of Asian supremacy, and yet all the disparities between white Americans and Black Americans are automatically assumed to be because of white supremacy. But this disparity, the disparity in abortions between white Americans, Asian Americans, and Black Americans, that's fine. That's not racism at all. It's interesting. Here's what the New York Times says about this. They actually did report on Planned Parenthood rolling up and providing free murder for women. They said, it also underscores the way this convention, more than any other, is going to be a head-on display of a new unbridled abortion politics. For years, many Democrats believe too much talk about abortion rights might drive away moderate or religious voters. 4 years ago, at the COVID dampen convention of 2020, President Biden did not utter the word abortion in his speech. Neither did Vice President Kamala Harris, although she did refer briefly to racial injustice and reproductive and maternal health care. We've done a whole episode on debunking that talking point too. But this year, after the overturning of Roe v. Wade turned abortion rights into one of Democrats' most potent political weapons, longtime supporters of abortion rights are expecting the issue and the word itself to be a central message. But you also notice, like, even on this, where they claim like this is such a winning issue for their side, that women just want abortion, all people just want abortion so much, they still have to lie. Like, they still won't say what abortion is, and they also use these stories of women not being able to get a DNC in the cases of miscarriage, saying that this is because of the laws that have been passed by Republicans, when that's just not true. If they even are true, they're because of the irresponsibility of the doctors. There is not a single law that restricts in any way a DNC after a miscarriage. And a DNC after a miscarriage, after the baby has already naturally died, is not the same thing as a DNC to actually kill the child. And so they're conflating that in order to push what I call toxic empathy. It is empathy manipulation, empathy bullying, for the purpose of pushing you to a perspective that is actually harmful for the very people that they say that they are defending. And unfortunately, this has convinced a lot of professing Christians, specifically evangelicals. There is an Evangelicals for Harris group, and they recently met on a Zoom call, and the theology that we heard in this call. Okay, we'll get into all of that in just a second. EveryLife is the only pro-life diaper company. This is also the diaper company that we use in our home. I love their diapers. They're made from premium ingredients. They're totally clean, no fragrances or fake stuff or anything like that. So I feel really good about my baby using EveryLife diapers, and they really do work. We don't have to worry about leaks or anything. And I love that they stand for pro-life values. Unfortunately, other diaper companies don't. They support all of their pregnant employees, and they also donate resources to pro-life pregnancy centers and organizations that are helping pregnant moms in need. Go to everylife.com today. Use code Allie10 to enjoy 10% off your first order. Everylife.com, code Allie10. All right. So last election, there was an evangelicals for Biden. Now there's an evangelicals for Harris. There were quite a few notable people on there. Probably the names that you've heard the most, I would say Jerusha Duford. I think that's how you pronounce her name. She is Billy Graham's granddaughter. Also, Billy Graham is being used in some ads by Democrats, and to basically say that Trump is not a Christian, because they are juxtaposing what Billy Graham said is the gospel and what you have to do for salvation, which is ask for forgiveness, empowered by grace. And then Trump saying that, well, I just don't think I need forgiveness, to try to say that Trump isn't saved. Look, I don't know whether Trump is saved or not. I do think, based on recent comments that he made some comments on Laura Ingraham where he said, yeah, if you're a good person, you go to heaven. If you're a bad person, you go to hell. And I think I'm a good person. Obviously, that means that he doesn't understand the gospel. I know people who have shared the gospel with Trump, solid people, so I know he's heard it. You could say he's a baby Christian. People have been saying that for a long time. I don't know. And I don't think Kamala Harris is a Christian. I mean, she said nothing to me to indicate that she understands the gospel in any way. And her policies tell me that she's a very bloodthirsty, rabid, cruel person. So I don't think she has the fruit of the Spirit. And so we've got that. We've got two people who might not be Christians. And so at the end of the day, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Who are you going to vote for? You can't say that Kamala Harris is more of a Christian than Donald Trump, because I don't think she indicates that in any slight way at all. And so you have to look at the policies, and that's where you let your biblical worldview guide you. And that's why I think evangelicals for Harris, especially in a lot of the videos that we are about to look at, are just completely delusional. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it, but just extremely delusional and ignorant to what the government is and does, and our responsibility as citizens. Latasha Morrison, we've talked about her, and we've talked about her work quite a few times. She's the author of Be the Bridge, and Be the Bridge is a program and a book that has been promoted by a lot of conservative evangelicals as the way to bring white Christians and Black Christians together through the gospel. We've talked about before, her book is not a gospel book. I think that she has some aspects of the gospel that she tries to weave in to her ideas, which are largely secular. And you can go back and you can listen to the episodes on that. I would have said way before this, I would have said, do not use Be the Bridge. Be the Bridge is not going to unite white and Black Christians. It's actually just going to stoke resentment and justification for resentment and a lot of partiality. I would say check out the Center for Biblical Unity. Monique Duson has been on this podcast. We've talked about Be the Bridge before and how biblical unity is better than so-called racial reconciliation, and a lot of the ungodly partiality that we see pushed by Be the Bridge. So I can't say that I am at all surprised by what I hear Latasha Morrison saying in this Evangelicals for Harris call, but it is it's disturbing nonetheless. So let's see. I have quite a few clips, and I can't play all of them because I'm running out of time. Okay, let's do SOP 4.
I look at which candidate is leaning me to love the other. Which candidate is leading us towards compassion? Which candidate is leading us to walk out the Sermon on the Mount, which is the blueprint of love?
Okay, that's not the role of a president. It's not. And I would say, like, if you want me to be fair, I'm going to say neither. There is nothing about Kamala Harris that is loving and that is depicting and demonstrating love. There is nothing about her campaign. There's nothing about her platform. She hasn't even put out her platform, but the Democrat platform, there's nothing about her policy proposals that I see that is loving. And now you could say that Donald Trump, personally, he doesn't come across as this like lovey-dovey guy, although I think that he has a lot of compassionate human moments. Honestly, more than I've seen with Kamala Harris. What I've seen with his family, with his grandchildren, what I've seen with many of his voters, the stories that you hear about him throughout his life, that he's been extremely generous and charitable and altruistic. I actually think that he is a softie, probably deep down. That's something I haven't seen from Kamala Harris. I don't know any stories of her generosity. I only know stories about how she's gone after people that she doesn't like. And go back and listen to our original Kamala Harris episode where we kind of go through her very cruel and calloused career and how she treats people who are in her way. I've only heard stories about how she's a nightmare to work with. So even on a personal level, like, no, I don't see that at all. But if you're even just talking about superficial politician, what we've seen in the way of like campaign speeches and talking points, sure, I'll at least say neither candidate is like living out or pushing the Sermon on the Mount, because that's not even their job. I would love that. I'd love that in a candidate. That's not who we have in either candidate. And that is not what the president does. The president represents a set of policies. He signs laws. He signs executive orders. He's got the nuclear codes. He's got access to the red button. It's a really important job. He's not making laws. He's not even deciding if a law is constitutional, but he does represent power. He does represent in the executive branch influence over the direction our country goes. Not completely, not totally, but in significant part. And so I care more about the policies that he is going to push than what you or anyone else thinks about his personality. Now, again, do I wish that he made it easier for everyone to say yes enthusiastically, I'm voting for Trump? Yeah, I do. There are definitely things I wish he would say. There are things that I wish he would not say. I wish he wouldn't have ragged on the Florida pro-life law. I wish he wouldn't have compromised on abortion, at least rhetorically, not politically when he was president. Of course, there are things I wish that he would do differently, but I know that I've got two flawed people. This is the message I was talking about earlier. I've got two flawed people. It's a two-person race, okay? It's a two-person race. RFK is polling at 3%, according to 538, okay? He's not going to win. He doesn't have a chance. We've got two people. We've got two flawed people. We've got two people who might not be Christians. We've got two people who you could argue in either direction aren't living out the Sermon on the Mount. You could argue maybe in either direction aren't showing adequate compassion in certain ways, aren't peacemakers in certain ways. You could argue that for both of them. So I want to look at what policies are they going to present and how is that going to affect our country now, our stability, our security, and how is that going to shape America for my children and my children's children? That's what I'm looking at. And when I look at Trump's policies, I see security, I see stability, I see prosperity. When I look at Kamala's policies, I see instability, I see an open border, I see lawlessness, I see chaos, I see degeneracy, and I see bloodthirst for babies inside the womb. I see global chaos. I see national chaos. I see institutionalizing the kind of immorality that has led to the destruction of societies throughout all of history. There's not a chance in heck that I could somehow do like Simone Biles level mental gymnastics to fit a biblical worldview into voting for Kamala Harris, even with the abortion issue aside, which should be enough and is okay to be enough again. But even with that aside, like I can't reconcile her borderless policy, her anti-life policies, life inside the womb, I think as well as life outside of the womb, her anti-First Amendment policies while she was senator, while she was attorney general, while she was district attorney. Like, I can't reconcile those things with my faith. Again, Simone Biles level mental gymnastics to try to do that. And I think that that is what is going on here. All right, last sponsor for the day is Good Ranchers. You can celebrate Labor Day the American way with a grill out featuring top quality American meat from Good Ranchers. theranchers.com. All of their products are sourced exclusively from local family farms, zero antibiotics, zero hormones, pre-trimmed, individually packed. We eat Good Ranchers almost every night at our home. I love that it shows up at my front door every month. I've got the ground beef. I've got the non-pre-marinated chicken. I love the shrimp and the salmon. I mean, I just love it all. Makes our life so much easier. I don't have to go into the grocery store and wonder if the meat is really high quality or made in America. I can just rest assured getting all my meat from Good Ranchers. Right now, if you subscribe to any Good Ranchers box, you get a free add-on for 1 year. So that means with every box that you get a free add-on of chicken breast or ground beef or anything that you want. Also, when you use my code Allie, you get $25 off your first box. GoodRanchers.com, code Allie. She talks about how grace is a gift. Latasha Morrison does. And so she says, so it's important for me that I, and the work that I do, that DEI doesn't become a word that is weaponized and criminalized, because diversity is about all people. Equity sets a pathway for everyone. And see, this is, again, euphemisms, toxic empathy, mishmash of words that don't have any substantive meaning, or at least aren't given any substantive meaning. She says that she sees in Vice President Harris an attitude of repentance, that she demonstrates meekness. Meekness is a picture of power and strength under control, and she sees that in Vice President Harris. I want to know how. Tell me exactly. Like, I don't really see meekness very much in Trump, but I don't see it in Harris either. Like, this is the difference, is that Democrats always accuse the right of, like, worshiping power and wanting empire and all of these things. But I'm not delulu about Trump. Like, I don't make things up to make him sound amazing and like an idol. I don't compare him to Jesus. But these people can't even just say, yeah, Kamala Harris is a really deeply imperfect person, but I agree with her on XYZ, so I'm going to vote for her. They have to make her into like the female modern Jesus. That is levels of delulu that I really can't understand. Okay, last clip that we're going to play from her. Here's Thought 6.
What we've seen just over the last year, we've seen the rollback of Roe versus Wade. And I am a person who is pro-life. I am a person that believes in life from the cradle to the grave. But I've seen this weaponized. I've seen this criminalized. I've seen women who have died. And because of that, I can no longer be a one-issue voter. I'm voting for the candidate that is leading with grace, that is leading with love, that is leading with compassion for the other. And I hope you will do so too.
So many things here. I don't even know what this means. I've seen the rollback of Roe v. Wade. I'm a person who is pro-life. She says cradle to the grave. I don't know if she really means womb to the tomb, though. She starts at cradle, which is interesting. She said, I've seen this weaponized. I've seen this criminalized. I have to read between the lines here because, again, this is just so vague and just nonsensical that I'm really giving the benefit of the doubt when I am assuming that she means, again, those women, I guess, who have died because they say that they didn't get miscarriage care. I would want to know exactly what she's talking about. Again, no pro-life law restricts miscarriage care in any way. If there's confusion on the doctor's part, I actually think it's political, like, malice going on. Then that's not the fault of the pro-lifers who are passing laws to protect the lives of unborn children. I don't know what she means by I've seen this weaponized and criminalized. I don't know. She said I can no longer be a one-issue voter. Look, again, pro-lifers, I'm not shaming anyone for that being your issue, why you would vote for the more pro-life candidate. I think that's a great one. You're on the side of life. Pro-abortion is on the side of death. It like, remove all of the nuances and all the confusing rhetoric and all the euphemisms. That's what it is. Point blank at the end of the day. But even if you look at the other issues, like she goes on to say, like, Trump is going to cause more systemic racism and he's going to make things so much worse. His policies aren't compassionate. Again, I just want specifics there because I don't see, when I look at Democrat policies, I don't see them being on the side of the family or the poor or the so-called marginalized or my neighbor at all. When I look at Republican policies, while the Republican Party is very far from perfect, of course, they are so much more conducive to human flourishing than the Democrat policies. I want a secure border. I want strong order. I want school choice. I want peace here and abroad, which we had largely under Trump. I want economic prosperity. And these are things I see more in the Republican platform than I see in the Democrat platform. And politics aren't the only way to love your neighbor, but it's a way to love your neighbor because politics affects policy, policy affects people, and people matter. And when I look at Democrat policies, when I look at unlimited welfare, when I look at the anti-school choice position that they have, when I look at their borderlessness and their lawlessness and their partiality, especially when it comes to justice, I see destructive policies that are going to be, have been extremely painful for my neighbors and for the country that God has providentially placed me in. And so again, there's just no way I could finagle support for the party that pushes the genital mutilation of children who say that they're confused about their gender, the party that takes kids out of their parents' custody because the parents won't go along with the so-called gender transition of a child. The party who wants to force your tax dollars to fund the dismembering of babies. You're telling me that the candidate that represents that platform is the compassionate, loving candidate? That is a spiritually blind position. It's not just morally repugnant. It's not just intellectually ignorant. That is a spiritually blind position. I am not saying Christians have to vote Republican. I'm not saying you have to vote at all. I'm not saying that your vote indicates whether you're going to heaven or hell. I think there's a lot of people who are not Christians on the Republican side. There's a lot of people who are not Christians on the Democratic side. But do I think that you can live in accordance with a biblical worldview and support that party platform? No. No, I don't. I think it's a sanctification issue. I do. And then there was another guy, Bishop Claude Alexander. He is the chair of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I won't play the clips because we just don't have time. But he says, this is the pro-life ticket. And they try to expand pro-life to mean things that have nothing to do with abortion at all. And to try to water down the abortion issue. Look, other issues matter. This is the only issue that's an actual matter of life and death. You are literally killing a child. You're literally killing a child. And I just don't have the mental energy to try to justify something as egregious as that. I think evangelicals for Harris, again, if they wanted to vote third party, if they wanted to not vote at all, I wouldn't agree with them. But I would say, okay, I get that. I do not see how there is any coherence at all in support for someone as radical and bloodthirsty as Kamala Harris. So we had even more to talk about, but we already went long. Don't have time to talk about all of it. We'll try to get to what we didn't talk about, like the Title IX changes and all different kinds of stuff tomorrow. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching and so much for listening. We will be back here then.